Many years ago, in the busy city of Amata, there was a quiet neighborhood where life was simple but full of love. Among the humble homes was the residence of Okafor and Ugodiya, a couple whose love was the envy of all who knew them. Okafor, a mechanic, was known for his skillful hands that could bring back life to any engine. He was not a wealthy man, but his hands earned him enough to put food on his table, and most importantly, to fill his home with love and laughter. Ugodiya, his beloved wife, was a petty trader. Every morning, she would rise before the sun to prepare her fruits, vegetables, and household items, which she would sell at the markets. She had a smile for everyone, a bright, sincere smile that matched her equally bright and sincere heart. She was well known in the markets, not just for her goods, but her good nature. Together, they were a team, bonded by love and a mutual respect that was extended to their modest means. The couple was blessed with a baby girl, Ifeoma. Their home was modest, but it was filled with love and the sound of their child's laughter. They were not wealthy, but they were happy. Every evening, after a long day of work, Okafor would return home, covered in grease, and Ugodiya would greet him with a warm meal. Their child Ifeoma would run to her father, and the family would gather around the small dining table, sharing stories of their day, their hearts full of contentment. Life was not always easy for the family. Okafor's job as a mechanic was physically demanding and paid just enough to keep the family afloat. Ugodiya's small business brought in a little extra, but there were days when the market was slow and the weight of providing for the family bore heavily on her. Yet they managed. They were determined to give their child the best life could offer. Education was a priority, and both Okafor and Ugodiya worked hard to ensure that their child attended school. Though it was a struggle to pay for her school fees, uniform, and books, they managed, even if it means skipping a meal or two. Their child Ifeoma was their pride and joy. Ifeoma was a bright and responsible girl who always helped her mother in the market when she wasn't in school. She was gentle and kind, always looking out for her parents to help in any possible way. She had a fierce, independent spirit that made her parents proud of her good behavior and dedication to her studies. One fateful evening, after a long day of work, Okafor did not return home. The night grew darker and Ugodiya began to worry. She asked the neighbors, went to his workshop, called out his name severally, but there was no answer. Ifeoma stayed close to her mother, sensing her fears. Hours later, a group of men from the neighborhood arrived at her doorstep, carrying a lifeless body in their arms. He had collapsed on his way home, his heart giving out after years of hard labor. Ugodiya's world shattered. In an instant, her beloved husband was gone. The pillar of her life, the father of her child, was no more. The pain was unbearable. A deep growing emptiness consumed her. But as the days went by, she realized there was no time to mourn. She had a child to care for, and that was all she had left. The burden of raising her child alone weighed heavily on Ugodiya. She was a strong woman, but the loss of her husband was a blow that she struggled to recover from. The market was no longer the same for her. Every corner reminded her of Okafor. of the times he would come to visit her during lunch breaks, of his laughter echoing through the stalls. She began to lose focus, her thoughts often drifting back to memories of her husband. The grief was too much for her to bear alone, but she had to stay strong for her child Ifeoma. Please don't forget to subscribe to my channel at African Story Tales by Ebi. Drop a comment, share with your loved ones. Thank you. Ifeoma, now a teenager, tried her best to support her mother. She took on menial jobs after school to help make ends meet. But it was not enough. The money was tight, and she and her mother struggled to get by. Ifeoma understood the full extent of her mother's pain. She could see the change in her. She was no longer the vibrant woman who was always with smile every day. Instead, she became quiet, withdrawn, her eyes often distant, as if searching for something just beyond reach. As months turned into years, Ugodiya's mental state began to worsen. The weight of her responsibilities, combined with the overwhelming grief of losing Okafor, her husband, began to torment her. She started to forget things, small things at first, like where she placed her keys or whether she had locked the door. But soon, the forgetfulness turned into confusion. She would find herself in the market, unsure of how she got there, and she would wander the streets, lost in her thoughts, forgetting how to return home. Ifeoma noticed the change, and it scared her. She tried to help her, taking on more responsibilities. Ifeoma would often cry. It saddened her heart seeing her mother drifting away on a daily basis. Confused by her mother's strange behavior, the neighbors began to talk, whispering about how the poor woman had lost her mind after the death of her husband. One day, Ugodiya had a complete breakdown. She was at the market trying to sell her goods when she suddenly started screaming, holding her head as if it's in pain. She began to throw her goods on the ground, tearing her clothes apart, her screams echoing through the marketplace. The other traders tried to calm her, but she was out of control. She screamed Okafor's name over and over until her voice was lost. Eventually, she collapsed, exhausted and broken, and the market women carried her home. After that day, Ugodiya was never the same. She stopped going to the market altogether, leaving her child Ifeoma to fend for herself. She would spend her days sitting in front of the house, talking to herself, often speaking to Okafor as if he were still alive. Ifeoma was left to overcome the harsh realities of life on her own. Ifeoma worked very hard to provide for her mother Ugodiya and also sponsor her education. She stayed focused, not allowing her family situation break her. Ifeoma watched as her mother's condition worsened. Her once bright eyes now dull and vacant. She would sometimes wander the streets, talking to herself, laughing at jokes only she could hear. The people in the neighborhood began to avoid her, afraid of her strange behavior. They would cross the street when they saw her coming, their eyes filled with pity and fear. Ifeoma suffered greatly during this time. She managed to save up a little money and completed her secondary education. Had no money left to further her university education. She took up her mother's business, used it to sustain herself and mother. The villagers started avoiding her, making side talks. She is the daughter of the mad woman. I feel so pity for this girl, but I can't afford to buy anything from them. Who knows the reason behind her madness, even though we know her story? They muttered. Despite Ifeoma's efforts, she could not care for her mother as she descended further into madness. There were days when Ugodiya would lock herself in her room, refusing to come out, speaking to herself in hushed tones as if she were in conversation with someone. Other times, she would burst into fits of laughter, her voice echoing through the empty house. One raining evening, Ugodiya disappeared. Ifeoma searched everywhere, calling out her name, but she was nowhere to be found. She searched the market, the streets, even the church, but there was no sign of her. Days turned into weeks, and still there was no trace of her mother. The neighbors joined in the search, but it was as if Ugodiya has vanished into the thin air. Finally, after weeks of searching, Ugodiya's lifeless body was found in a small, abandoned house on the outskirts of the city. She had wandered there in madness, seeking shelter from the rain, and had succumbed to the cold. Her body was thin and frail, a mere shadow of the woman she once was. Ifeoma was devastated, her heart broken by the loss of her mother, who had been taken from her not once but twice, first by madness and then by death. The neighborhood gathered to mourn Ugodiya. They remembered her as she was a loving mother, a devoted wife, and a hardworking woman who had been broken by the weight of her grief. The tragedy of her life was a stark reminder of the harsh realities of their world, where the strong were often brought low by the burdens they carried. Ifeoma was left to fend for herself, but she was determined to honor her parents' memory. Though life had been cruel to her, she held on to the love and values that Okafor and Ugodiya has instilled in her. She worked hard to build a better future. It was a long, difficult journey, but she persevered, driven by the memory of her parents' love and sacrifice. Years passed. Ifeoma grew into an adult and got married to a wealthy man who sponsored her tertiary education to become a medical doctor. She lived happily with her husband, making sure to stay close and support each other through life's challenges. Though the pain of losing her parents never faded away, she found peace in the love she shared as a family. She often visited her parents' grave, telling stories of her life, her successes, and her struggles, knowing that her parents would be proud of what she had become. Ugodiya's story was a tragic one, but it was also one of, though she had been brought low by the weight of her grief, the love she had shared with Okafor, and the values they had instilled in her child, lived on. Ifeoma, despite all she had endured, had grown into a strong, compassionate adult, a proof to the strength of the love that had once filled their home. Despite all Ifeoma had to endure, she didn't let her spirit be broken. She navigated the hurdles of life and found peace at last in her home, which is filled with love and happiness. She established a psychiatric home in her hometown in Amata to see to the health of people in the villages with mental disorder for free of charge. Her mother's mental health wouldn't have resulted to her death if there was a proper medical attention to that. That is why she had to establish a psychiatric home for the less privileged in her hometown in the memory of her mother, Ugodiya. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this story. Please share with me what your thoughts are in the comment section, and don't forget to leave a like. Subscribe to my channel, turn on your notification button, and stay tuned for more interesting and mind-blowing story coming your way. I remain your favorite storyteller, African Story Tales by Abby. Thank you. Bye.